Jack Rhythm with his paper on the archive and the impossibility of escape.
Right, thank you. I'm Will. My paper, as you were just told, is The Archive and the Impossibility of Escape. This is an edited extract of the paper that was published last year. Unfortunately, it will largely take the format of the reading a paper to you, so sorry for the lack of interactivity. It will largely be in two parts. To begin with, I'll be looking at a close reading of this book, Derrida's Archive Fever. From there, sort of trying to get an understanding of theories of the archive. After that, we'll be looking at developments in technology, the internet, and how our theories of the archive can provide an understanding of that. So, to begin, we will think about Derrida's archive fever. In a gesture typical of the deconstructive method, Derrida traces the etymological history of the word archive, and in so doing tries to arrive at a sense of its present meaning. He identifies the archive with centralization, both of power, there where men and gods command, there where authority and social order are exercised, and of physical space. On account of their publicly recognized authority, it is as their home, in that place which is their house, with official documents to file. By this standard, the effect of the archive is to entrench a centralized human authority, validated by the ability granted by the archival records to recall the law, call on, and impose upon the law. This human figure is the archon, who is first of all the document's guardian, and as a consequence granted the power to interpret. This is not a uniquely ancient situation. In the early modern era, the modern European public archive came into being in order to solidify and memorialize first monarchical and state power. Authority is grounded upon this localization and centralization. The authoritative power of this central point expands outward to every aspect of society, including determinations of temporality. The archon was not only the eponymous official in ancient Athens, but it was also the designated regulator of the lunar or festival calendar. It is clear that the archive, and therefore the archon, and the corresponding centralization of information and authority, extends back through history almost to the dawn of literacy. My intention in this paper is to consider how modern technological developments have affected the archive and its ancient potential as a means of validating and entrenching authority. Now, archive fever is as much a text about Freud, psychoanalysis, and Jewishness as it is about the archive. Yet all these divergent threads are integrally linked by the theme of authority. Relations of authority form a thematic linchpin in the text, embodied in the patriarch. The relationships between Freud and his father Jacob, as well as between Yerushalmi and Freud, and indeed Derrida himself and Freud and Yerushalmi, are linked by these ideas of authority. This offers a paradigm for archives, the arche, which overlaps with the patriarch to form a representative figure demanding collective homogeneity. The very possibility of the archive as a repository of knowledge and thus a history of culture is rooted in these traces of phylogenetic memory. The archival is therefore correlative with the patriarchal. Archival or patriarchival determinations of culture, which pull towards a central authority, operate in opposition to an individual drive as a contrast, which pulls towards a self-determined and separate culture. It seeks to found itself. Much as the son pulls against the conformity demanded by the father. Freud identifies the individual drive as material truth, as opposed to historical truth, the collective determination of history as enforced by the archive. We can interpret Derrida's reading of Freud's analysis of Godiva as indicative of the ever-present duality. His reading of Freud's reading of the book emphasizes a piece of the story that resists conventional, rational explanation. In the end, it is the truth of insanity, of hauntedness, that returns because it too belongs to some spectral historical and not just material truth that Freud's archive, perhaps despite himself, cannot do without. The material or individual drive is tied integrally to the historical drive, inasmuch as the move towards one is a move away from the other. When one moves towards self-determination and individualism, one tears away from the father and the collective history or culture that he embodies. In light of this, we can understand the death drive, the drive to destroy the archive, which Derrida characterizes as the drive to precisely destroy any trace without any reminder, without any trace, without any ashes. He terms this the archivolithic power. This is the archive fever of the title. The burning desire to erase the past and thereby move determinedly into an individual existence free of patriarchal influence. This desire is integral to all societies. The need permanently to destroy the debris, the taming, by violence, if necessary, of the demon that they carry. A complete destruction, however, is not feasible. Derrida's theory of hauntology, postulated in Spectres of Marx, indicates the impossibility of making a fresh historical start. History, as a ghostly phenomenon, does not march forward, it comes and goes, it appears and recedes, materializes and evaporates. The revolutionary desire to found a new time, apparent, for example, in the establishment of an entirely new calendar in France after their revolution, is a consequence of the destructive urge to destroy the archive, and as such history. So, the destroyed archive haunts the state in the form of a spectre. The fact that the archive is traditionally based physically in one place, a building which might well be burned, ensures that annihilation appears perfectly flat. The apparent possibility for destruction cannot be extricated from the archive, which is made possible by limitation. Derrida writes that the desire for archive is a burning one. This is also what Carolyn Steedman describes as unease about the great unfinished, the pursuit of the teleological goal of the finished archive. The feverish desire to create archives and the feverish desire to destroy them are not as easily separated as we might imagine. Now, Derrida's text considers primarily the paper archive, that of the library or the museum. One is left wondering about the ramifications of technological advancements in data storage on the theory of the archive. In the internet age, data is rarely stored in one physical place. It might be spread around the world on various servers, backed up on disks and hard drives. When physically decentralized, does the archive still retain its nature as an embodiment of authority, or perhaps a patriarch? Regarding the possibility of the internet offering a Derridean, endless, indefinite text, we can surmise that there are always limits. The cut-off point will always ensure the existence of individual texts, as opposed to the singular, all-encompassing text. The internet represents the archival desire made electronically manifest, a desire for centralizing knowledge. The ancient teleological aspiration of the arche is reflected in the romantic optimism surrounding the myth of the infinite book without material support. The stated intentions of internet companies like Google and Wikipedia to catalogue all knowledge and information is symptomatic of this drive, and is in effect the modern manifestation of the archival urge, buoyed into extreme optimism by the illusion of absolute epistemological transparency and apparent immediacy that the internet offers. Google, for example, aspires, and this is a quote from their corporate site, to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. This is chaotic utopianism. There can be no worldwide web as ubiquitous book finally reconstituted, the book of God, the great book of nature, or the world book finally achieved in its ontotheological dream. The teleological desire to archive is countered by the disruption, the dislocation, the disjunction, the dissemination with no possible gathering, the irreversible dispersion of this total codex. But the transience of electronic communication and opening up of different modes of communication bring into existence. The computer records everything, and at the same time gives the appearance of preserving nothing. The written word appears at once permanent and yet temporary. When one sends an email, or posts something on a message board, for example, it is utterly ephemeral. And yet it is utterly permanent at the same time, stored forever in a database, inbox, or cache. Communication in the modern age, the Internet Archive, seems balanced between two irreconcilable disparities. But then the archive has always existed in just such a limited space. It has always been suspended between these two teleological extremes, both of which are the respective products of the death drive and the drive to preserve and complete. The internet, due to its immediacy, makes this more apparent than it has been before, but does not perhaps constitute anything entirely new. Human nature, technical nature, is simply made more apparent by technological immediacy, not changed by it. Either archival drive remains unrealizable, and as such, so does the idea of the complete archive, or indeed the utterly vanquished archive. Despite this, the possibility of the archive, the Internet Archive, as a means of social control or surveillance is an omnipresent risk. Technology has produced an imbalance. Despite the impossibility of creating a complete archive, the speed of archival transactions and improved technology for surveillance mean that the space for individual escape is becoming increasingly limited. For a moment, let's consider the case of Dr. Hawley Harvey Crippen. In 1910, Dr. Crippen, having murdered his wife, attempted to escape to Canada with his mistress on a ship. British police, using revolutionary wireless equipment, sent a message to their Canadian counterparts, who intercepted and arrested Crippen before he disembarked. This is an illustrative example of the means in which technological development increasingly prevents the possibility of, in this case literal, escape. As power is ever more centralized in the expanding archive, the individual finds it ever more difficult to escape surveillance and data storage, or indeed the reach of increasingly fast and wide-ranging means of communication, all of which are intricately linked and can be collectively utilized to expand the reach of the archive, and in so doing, minimize the space in which anyone might operate outside its limits. 100 years later, of course, we have Snowden, fleeing the opposite direction from the new world to the old. One of them the victim of the expanding archive, the other its exposer, perhaps eventually its victim too. Political power is centered in the archive, and developments in techniques of observation and data recording present the potential for a panoptical system that leaves very little room for individual escape. The prevention of the physical escape of Dr. Crippen is paralleled in the increasingly limited space in which the individual can operate as an individual, i.e. without supervision and inscription in the archival matrix. The self-organizing capacity of the archive has come to the fore with the rise of the internet. This is something of immense importance, and we'll explore it later. According to Michel Foucault, the archive is that which determines that all things said do not accumulate endlessly in an amorphous mass, nor are inscribed into an unbroken linearity, nor do they disappear at the mercy of chance external accidents, but they are grouped together in distinct figures, composed together in accordance with regularities, that which determines that they do not withdraw at the same pace and time. The archive is not that which, despite its immediate escape, safeguards the event of the statement, and preserves for future memories its status as an escapee. It is that which, at the very root of the statement event, and in that which embodies it, finds at the outset the system of its impossibility. The archive possesses an unlimited inclusive potential, I believe is the message of that, yet it is still founded upon a central, determining point due to its relationship with temporal authority. Thus, the archive always carries the potential for misuse and tyranny, as well as oppressive homogeny. However, the ubiquity of the archive can be double-sided in terms of its potential effect on human rights. Records may be instruments of power, but paradoxically, the same records can also become instruments of empowerment and liberation, salvation and freedom. Mass observation by government agencies or corporate bodies severely limits freedom. Yet this record-keeping is simultaneously a possible force for accountability. The archives have a twofold power, being evidence of oppression and containing evidence required to gain freedom, evidence of wrongdoing and evidence of undoing wrong. The internet fulfills this double quality. Organizations can indeed use the centralization of data as a means of surveillance and repression, yet the very comprehensiveness of the internet archive allows evidence of such misuses to be exposed. WikiLeaks is a good example of how the internet archive can be used for accountability. So inasmuch as the basic archival drives that have existed since the dawn of literacy are continually enacted upon the internet and have contributed to its creation and development, should we consider then the internet is not necessarily something entirely new, at least in terms of its relation to human nature. In studying the internet, we might understand the archive in a way that has not yet been possible. It's difficult to concur with the traditional definition of the archive as dead papers put aside for future reference when considering web pages or cached data. Yet the difference between the paper archive and the virtual archive is, by Derrida's standard, merely one form, not quality. We can view the internet as the most perfect consummation of the ancient drive to archive. It is almost an autonomic process. The archive archives itself. I contend, technological nature, or indeed the technological item, cannot be considered something entirely separate to man. Man's existence is a technical existence, and man's technological development into cyberspace is not a development of something separate, therefore, but rather an ontological expression of his own technical nature. By this logic, the basic drives of archive and materiality should be unaffected regardless of the specificities of the technology in question. Might we say, therefore, that the only advancement is the speed with which transactions can be made, and the increasing comprehensiveness of this new virtual archive? Excuse me. I believe not. The development of man as technical being presents an entirely new array of possibilities. As the archive expands, so too must our thoroughness, ensuring that information is stored ethically and used appropriately. Hyperamnesia can be a consequence of the post-mnemonic culture engendered by the ever-present archive. Intensified archivalization leads not to cultural forgetting, but to an excess of cultural memory. The new carriers of data make possible processes of sorting information and seeking for information which are administered on an ever more exhaustive and efficient basis. Mountains of archivalized photographs, tape recordings, videos increase all the time, even though they are more fragile with respect to their stability over long time sequences when compared with the printed word. But we now live in such an over-informed culture that cleverness will consist not in accumulating information, which today can be done by any child on the internet with any search engine, but rather in rejecting information, knowledge as selective ignorance. This presents a conceivable state of affairs for the near future. As a thought exercise, we can think of a certain threshold that must have been reached at a particular point in man's technological evolution, either in the near past or in the near future. And at this point, an inversion occurs, whereby man's technical being is extracted outwards. The consequence then is technical nature externalized and ontological loss. The potential for the individual to know is equivalent to his capacity to forget. The archive has the potential to override the autonomous human being inasmuch as it becomes a determining force of his discursive existence. The concept of the self-reflexive, all-encompassing archive corresponds, I believe, to Bernard Stiegler's theory of technocracy, technics and time, would be the book that refers to, in which man has become the servant of technology instead of vice versa. I quote, "Technocracy should be considered less as the power of technicians than as technicians in the service of power. Power created by technics as efficiency and a source of legitimacy. The technocratic state no longer has as its aim either the encouragement of communicative action or the achievement of a critical distance towards purposive, rational action. Its activity consists in finding solutions to questions of a technical nature, those that escape public discussion. The situation generates a systemic closing, in which social interests define a social system, so much that they coincide with the maintaining of that system. If we apply Steigler's theory to the internet, the possibility that emerges that man has created an archive that possesses a self-determining authority, one that is too expansive and powerful to involve any particular human figure as archon. Its principal activity, as Stiegler points out, is its own maintenance and self-reflexivity. Science has become subservient to technical expansion and instrumentality, and as such the ancient balance between episteme and techne has become imbalanced. One serves the other. Authority has always resided in the archive, in the past authenticating the will of the individual or group who had access to it. But as a result of the rise of the technocracy that Stiegler writes of, the crossing of the ontological horizon past which technical nature is inverted and externalized, it could now be said that man serves the machine. The prosthesis leaves the organ. The technological internet archive is self-justifying and self-reflexive. It is not inconceivable that the end product of the fusing of technology and the archive will be, in the words of the French neuroscientist and critic Catherine Van Hu, a brain that changes itself. The world book finally achieving this ontotheological dream is, as Derrida points out, an impossible ideal. Yet the panopticon is, in my opinion, even in a stunted form, an ever-present risk. The question will be, whom will it serve? Or will it serve only itself? Thank you.